very much. Thank you. This is May 21st, 2018, the Salina City Commission's regular meeting. We'll have a call to order and a roll call, please.
Mayor Ryan.
Here.
Commissioner Davis.
Here.
Commissioner Hay.
Here.
Commissioner Hodges. Here. Commissioner Hoppick.
Here.
If you're able, would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all very much. Awards and proclamations.
Item 3.1, the week of May 20th through 26th of 2018 as Emergency Medical Services Week in the City of Salina. Fire Chief Kevin Royce will read the proclamation.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. To designate the week of May 20th to 26th, 2018 as National Emergency Medical Services Week. Whereas emergency medical services is a vital public service, and whereas the members of the City of Salina Fire Department are ready to provide life-saving care to those in need 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and whereas access to quality emergency care dramatically improves the survival and recovery rate of those who experience sudden illness or injury, whereas the City of Salina Fire Department has grown to fill a gap by providing important out-of-hospital care, including preventative medicine, follow-up care, and access to telemedicine, and whereas the emergency medical service system consists of first responders, emergency medical technicians, paramedics, emergency medical dispatchers, firefighters, police officers, educators, administrators, hospital nurses, emergency physicians, and other trained members of the public. And whereas the members of the Salina Fire Department engage in thousands of hours of specialized training and continuing education to enhance their life-saving skills. And whereas it is appropriate to recognize the value and accomplishments of emergency medical service providers by designation of Emergency Medical Services Week, now, therefore, I call Ryan, Mayor of the City of Salina, Saline County, Kansas. In recognition of this event, do hereby proclaim the week of May 20th to May 26th, 2018 as Emergency Medical Services Week.
Well, I thank you very much, Chief. I'd like to pass this along to you. Are there any other, do you have any other programs or events going on to celebrate this?
We don't. We're just maintaining 24/7 service. I would like to take a quick minute. It's kind of, I don't know if we really want to have a lot of events.
I'd love to tour one of the vehicles sometime.
Yeah. We as a department cannot provide any of these services without the support of this governing body, including a few individuals that really make our job not easy, but make our job fulfilling. And one of those is our medical director, Dr. Sean Harrington. And I just want to recognize him real quickly because he has allowed our paramedics through his trust and his training to do things that other communities are not allowed to do. That and our day-to-day operations that are overseen by EMS Chief Shane Pearson and our experienced medical officers and our trained paramedics. So again, we thank you for your support in our service.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks to Dr. Harrington as well. 3.2.
The week of May 20th through 26th, 2018 as National Public Works Week in the City of Salina. Wayne Nelson will read the proclamation.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, whereas public works services provided in our community are an integral part of our citizens' everyday lives, and whereas the support of an understanding and informed citizenry is vital to the efficient operation of public works systems and programs such as streets and highways, stormwater and levee systems, solid waste collection and disposal operations, municipal fleet maintenance services, water treatment and distribution, wastewater collection and treatment, engineering and inspection, public facilities, and whereas the health, safety, and comfort of this community greatly depends on these services and facilities each and every day, as well as in times of emergency and community disaster. And whereas the quality and effectiveness of these services and facilities, as well as their planning, design, and construction, is vitally dependent upon the efforts and skill of public works officials, and whereas the efficiency of the qualified and dedicated personnel who staff public works departments is materially influenced by the people's attitude and understanding of the importance of the work they perform. Now, therefore, I, Carl F. Ryan, Mayor of the City of Salina, do hereby proclaim the week of May 20 through May 26, 2018 as National Public Works Week in the City of Salina, and I call upon all citizens and civic organizations to acquaint themselves with the issues involved in providing our public works and to recognize the contributions which public works officials make every day to our health, safety, comfort, and quality of life. In witness thereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the City of Salina, Kansas to be affixed this 21st day of May, 2018.
Do you have anything else calendared that celebrates this week?
We have one event scheduled for Friday. We're going to have a Public Works lunch at the General Services area, so that will be the extent of our external celebrations.
Well, great. Thank you all for what you do for us, and we up here hear a great deal more detail about those things, and we certainly appreciate it. Yeah. We'll move on to the Citizens Forum. This is an opportunity for anybody that would like to address the commission on a matter that concerns them to do so. And so I'd offer the podium to anybody that would like to come up and have something to say to us.
Yeah, I'm a local basketball player in Salina.
And if you don't mind, we'd like to have the clerk especially like to have your name and,
My name is
and your
Charles
address.
Bates Jr.
Thank you.
And I'm a local basketball player here, and I've noticed the changes that you guys made at Sunset Park and the basketball goals. And I noticed the intentions were to make it accessible for the guys who play basketball and the guys who play futsal, I believe that's the name of the sport. It's the goals that were put up were not very safe at all, not only for basketball athletes, but for children as well, which should have been the number one concern. I've petitioned and everything to have the goals removed. The goals have been removed. Now that the goals are removed, I don't see no reason why that park doesn't have the basketball courts that the other courts have with the upgrades, as far as every other court in Salina that we don't play basketball on, but they have lines on there. So the one court that is used the most, I don't understand why it doesn't have lines, not only for basketball, but for the futsal players as well. The goals need to be upgraded. Just the park in general needs to be upgraded, because I see every other park around Salina has been upgraded besides Sunset Park. They've started a few of them, and I'm starting to see it, but the basketball court I feel like is used the most, and I just don't understand why it's been neglected. And I got a support of a community behind me that feels the same way. And if I could just get the support of you guys to back up what the community's doing, there wouldn't be no problem why this park isn't upgraded to the par of the other parks. That's really all I need to say.
Mr. Schrag, I guess this has started a little conversation. There was a photograph and article in the newspaper about it. I think Commissioner Hay went out to visit with some folks.
Certainly. There's also been additional dialogue in the last week, over the weekend, and today. And so I think between the Parks Director and other staff, phone conversations on site, there were conversations about the points that Mr. Bass raised, and a recognition that the locally fabricated unit that was intended to be a combined goal for futsal, soccer, and basketball does present some safety concerns with the lack of the goal projecting forward, and the basketball goal projecting forward of the futsal goal. And so it has been removed. Parks Department's in the process of finding a new replacement basketball goal as a temporary fix. There's also been some recognition of we're dialoguing now, but we could have had an opportunity to dialogue in advance. So we brainstormed some ways that if we had it to do over again, we could start that conversation. With respect to the upgrades and maintenance of the park, there has been investment in Sunset Park in terms of playground equipment and aesthetic improvements, but Mr. Bass raises the point about lines on that particular basketball court. And then lastly, I think there's an attempt to be innovative. There's an attempt to recognize the use of that court. It's the only court in the community that is fenced and lighted, and so it's more of a multi-use facility. We everything from street hockey to soccer players were using it anyway, and using trash cans as the goal. So it was already in a multi-use configuration, and Parks was trying to facilitate that. So I think the intentions were to be innovative and be supportive. We learned a couple lessons. If we had it to do over again, we could have done better, and the conversation's ongoing, and we'll certainly have more conversation before we proceed with anything other than replacing the basketball goals.
Just one follow-up question, if I might. I know we've got nearly $6 million in outstanding parks deferred maintenance. Are there any plans to address that court specifically in the next cycle of capital improvement projects? Or
Actually, Chris Cotton might be able to speak to the improvements that have been made in the park, as well as what the future intentions are.
I know we're not supposed to have favorites, but Sunset is mine since I grew up there.
So since coming to town a little, not quite 2 years ago, we have made a lot of improvements at Sunset. Number one, obviously, we've upgraded the playground equipment. We've cleaned up a lot of trees and bushes that were in serious need of attention to open it up. We are in the process of working on a nature trail in the park. We have aesthetically restored all 3 of the restroom units in the park. And we are working on, obviously, the basketball court. That is a multi-purpose facility. It is not only used by basketball and futsal. At one time, it was also used extensively for street hockey, which is why we have the boards on the bottom to keep the pucks and the balls from going out the fence. And also, I see quite a bit of rollerbladers out there using it. It is the only lit court in our system, specifically for that purpose, not the tennis courts. So as we go forward with the master plan and making improvements, obviously we will look to improve everything that we can and when we can. So absolutely it will be on the list.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the prompt attention to that.
Definitely.
Anyone else?
Yes, I'd like to address a concern as a concerned citizen. My name is Ruth Lavoie.
I'm
I live
Berlin
at,
Knapp. We're
I
at
live-
1322 Derby here in Salina.
and we have a shed that the animals like. We've tried everything, rocks, bricks, everything to go around it. And no matter what we try, we get wild animals there. We have a daycare down at the end of our street, and there's Schilling School
We have
there.
a school district down there, Schilling School. There is a bus route there at the corner of Derby.
And so my concern is that I had been misinformed about what the city does for wild
For
animals.
the animal control. Is this on a tax roll that we have a service through the animal control, paying taxes on this? Or do we charge everyone for this service?
Because we caught a skunk in the back in the thing.
And they wouldn't come and,
They wouldn't come. They gave me a number to call. It was Toxel. So I called them. They said, well, it's $125 plus tax. It ended up being $135.94. And when Toxel came out, he said, I haven't heard that ever. He said, I
there
didn't know
was no
this.
announcement, nothing in the paper?
And so I called, and I was asked, okay, when was the public notified that you don't take
Wild animals.
I asked also, what are the wild animals you don't take? And she named off raccoons, skunks, possums, and she named off all the wild animals. They don't come out and help you with those anymore. I lived in the middle of Salina, and I had a possum that crawled into a can that there was no way I personally was able to do it because I'm not trained. They're trained how to take wild animals. We were watching TV last night, and it talked about the animal control came out for an alligator in another state. So when I was told that they wouldn't do it, that I had no other choice to pay Toxol to get rid of the animal, I was concerned. This is a big city.
You know, 48,000 people, 45,000 people, and
Everybody's
she
gonna be
couldn't give us a
charged.
date when they made all these changes. There was no date. We were notified no date changes of not picking up any wild animals.
So,
And I told the officer that day that I was there in February that we've got a problem down there with wild animals. And I took it up on myself in February, which I had caught a skunk underneath the building in the cage. I took it up on myself to take it up to the animal control at 10 o'clock that morning from the KHP training center where I work. I took it up there and I distinctly told the officer that I would not leave the animal in the cage near the house with the school kids and daycare and construction site going on, running new water lines down in that area. So I took it upon myself and brought it down there to them. They think that we were calling them constantly all the time, and we weren't.
also, I've gone every place I can to find out what the rules are because I was told, oh, it's just in the spring we decided this. And I said, no notification? No notification.
So, main concern is if any of these animals were rabied with a daycare center down there and school children, sure, there may not be any rabies reported. It only takes one time.
That it happens. So my concern is, so is everybody in this city
Is everybody
going
going to pay for this cost?
That is a concern. And I understand now it's under Parks and Rec. And I was at work when the Parks and Rec called me back. I was off in the morning and I asked them, please call me back right away. Well, they called in the middle of where I work and I stopped because there was no one there. And when somebody came in, I had to do my work. So what I got told by that person was, we call too much, and they've been out over and over about a bird feeder. I did not know that Salina had a ordinance that said you couldn't have a bird feeder.
We can't have bird feeders in the city of Salina?
And so I just am concerned that somebody else is going to get the bill. It takes me over a day to make that kind of money. I know other people make more than I do, but it takes me that much to make that money. So I'm concerned, is everybody going to have that problem? And if I call again, will I not get any help? It's a concern of
The
mine.
main thing is we need to find out if it's on a tax roll. If everybody's paying for this service, then we should be allowed to call them and have them pick up wild animals. If not, I guess they're going to have to charge everybody in the city of Salina a fee to have them picked up.
But they need to notify us that
There
that's
was
what's happening.
no notification in the paper or anything.
That's all I have to say.
Well,
and
thank you very much. We'll give some attention to this, Mr. Schrag. I'm afraid I don't know a great deal about the distinction between wild and domesticated animals, so I assume there's something in the policy here.
Well, I think we do have some miscommunication with respect to bird feeders, things like that. What I can tell you is that, 2 years ago, maybe less than that, there was need for us to look at service levels and workload of the animal shelter, given the number of staff, given kind of the 24/7 nature of the operation, and be more strategic in the services we committed ourselves to. So there was a conscious decision to limit our response to wild animal calls and not necessarily rabies incidents or potential rabies incidents, but just wild animal calls in general. So that is a policy change. In terms of the communication, well, a couple things. In terms of the tax rolls, our taxes are not itemized to that level of detail to say these are the services you are or aren't receiving for the taxes you pay. It's more of a level of service delivery decision that has to be made. And so that was the change. With respect to communication, I don't know that it was advertised in the paper. We don't typically advertise to that level of detail as well. But it sounds to me like we could have done more in terms of communicating, explaining the policy, and helping any citizen have a better understanding of the approach and the reasoning behind it. In fact, I think our animal control supervisor is here and can probably speak with the Lavoie's outside of the meeting and kind of pick up that conversation. But I would tell you that that decision was made looking at our service levels, looking at other recommended practices, both just at the animal control national level and services provided by other wildlife agencies, whether that's the state or other communities. It's not uncommon for these type of issues to be a recurring issue, that trapping and releasing them doesn't solve the problem. It's more of an issue of what's harboring them, what's enticing the animal to be there in the first place, which is something that animal control can't necessarily control. That might be more of an education component to help people understand ways to prevent that. As a side note, I would tell you one of our department heads has had 2 foxes and a family of kits under their deck for going on 4 months now. They're continuing to struggle with trying to keep them out of their location, and they've reached out to the state more so than the city and had a similar response in terms of not providing that service.
If I could just address you and actually also Ms. Cowie, who's here. As someone who's had skunks, possums, raccoons, foxes, and most recently coyotes that have called my yard home, and until we received some information, and I don't know if you've received it yet, but we did get a response both from Ms. Cowie of Animal Services in terms of what the policy is now, as well as it was about a 40-page guide from, I believe it was from the Humane Society of the United States, about how the best ways are to deal with these kinds of undomesticated animals being in places where we don't want them. And really, there were a lot of very good suggestions, some of which I'd already looked up online when we were trying to deal with the coyotes, because that was just something that between the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks and our policies, I couldn't get help with. But if you haven't received that yet, I'd like for you all to leave. I think we have your email address, but hopefully we can make a connection between you and animal control, and we can help you get some information to address the problem in your yard.
So it was legal for them to tell me they wouldn't come and that I'd get charged that much money to have somebody come?
I can't speak to how that was handled, between you and specific staff members. I mean, if that's the level of response, I'm not, obviously not happy with that. But at the same time, this is a policy that they've applied. I mean, you're not being singled out. It's been applied to me as well, and so I mean, I can say that I mean, I at least was, I was aware of the policy. I did get more information from staff, and I do appreciate it. I can understand the logic of, Animal Services has its budget, and they try to do the most good, like any other department in the city, with the resources that we give them. And I'm sure it wasn't a decision that was undertaken, lightly, but.
So why was it not publicized?
Could you come up to the podium when you speak for the benefit of the people that watch on television?
Why wasn't it publicized if this is the policy? I mean,
Did all the city commissioners know about the changes?
We don't know every
animal
policy
control?
that's in our regulations, but
That's more of
if it's
a
published, it's
management
sure.
level decision at the department head and city manager level. And so in terms of communicating the decision, I think we could have done a better job when you reached out to us to explain it. But again, if we were to publish each of those type of decisions in the paper, it'd be quite a few. An example that's more universal, that's a little dated now, but police departments used to unlock, if you locked your keys in the car, they used to provide that service. You're not going to find that to be the case with any police department anymore. It's along the same lines of us having to revisit what we can provide with the staff and the budget that we have. And so
it's up to us citizens to tell the people.
our expectation is at the point that an individual citizen has an issue, we can communicate with them. We did not identify the need to proactively communicate that when it's a very limited number of citizens that actually face this problem. And, trapping is not the only option. In fact, it may not be the preferred option. Trying to deter them in the first place so that they're not on your property. Trapping is just going to capture that one animal, and then you run the risk of having to trap another. If you can deter them, you're in a better situation in terms of cost, I would think.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I would suggest that you have the opportunity to speak with our animal control supervisor. She's here, and that might be better than trying to do it by phone message later.
And Mike, I know a lot of our departments have brochures that they've got. And can we get an updated brochure done for the animal services so that that is included on the back of that brochure saying that, that this is what we do and this is what we won't do?
Right. And that's a good point. And explaining, why we've made this decision, as well as providing the information that Commissioner Hodges described as alternative approaches. So yes, that's certainly something we can do.
Thank you, then. Are there others that would like to speak under the Citizens Forum, please?
Yeah, good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. My name is John Blanchard. I live at 1117 State Street. I actually have a feral cat problem around my place, but I believe that might be an isolated incident. But what I wanted to come here and ask you about was I appreciate that you are looking into some of the flaws in the concrete over at the field house. One of the issues that I'm concerned about and related to the field house, and I'm looking just maybe for some direction here from either commissioners or staff, is I'd like information on the operation and revenues of that budget, of that facility, because it's hard to find in the budget because it's kind of broken out into facilities. But when the field house was under consideration, there was a financial feasibility study and projections made for that. And in fact, I think those projections were carried through to the overall downtown project. So could you tell me where I would need to file an open records request? Where would I need to file that to get the actual costs of the operations, the actual revenues, and how well the field house is performing? For instance, I noticed that there was advertised a tournament that was held the 19th and 20th, Saturday and Sunday of this month. And the limit was 100 teams, and I went and looked on the Mid-American Youth Basketball webpage and noticed that only 33 teams had actually attended that tournament. And driving by there a few times over the weekend, the parking lot at 6:30, 7 o'clock at night was completely empty. And so I was kind of concerned that maybe those numbers aren't quite clicking to where they need to be. But how would members of the public know whether that building is performing as promised?
With respect to the open records request, you can file that with the city clerk, and whatever request they receive gets distributed and responded to. With respect to knowing those numbers, the most likely place that we'd have that conversation would be part of our budget discussions as we prepare for the upcoming budget. But that's certainly a reasonable request and information that can be provided outside of the budget process.
Is that not provided anywhere online to the public about, hey, this tournament came and went, and this is how many people attended?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant the numbers related to the field house in general. No, I'm not aware that we provide a financial accounting of whether it's softball tournaments, soccer tournaments, or tournaments in the field house. That is not.
And so from an attendance standpoint, would that request be made to the city, or is it something that somebody like the Chamber of Commerce? I mean, I can't make an open records request to the Chamber of Commerce because they're not covered under CORA.
So let me make sure I understand what it is you're requesting then.
Two things, right? Okay. Yeah, two things. I think you're tracking pretty good. The attendance and the kind of how the visitor numbers is the one thing, and that's kind of where do I file that? But the question is that is it recorded with is it a Parks and Recs
I think it's
for the
gonna-
operation and revenue side.
Right, operations revenue side would definitely be Parks and Rec and would be the open records request as I described. Tournament could very well vary depending on who the tournament organizer and sponsor is. If it's through the Parks and Rec department, that's a record we would have. If it's through MAYB or a not-for-profit or the Chamber of Commerce, that's not necessarily a record that we would have that we could produce, nor are they subject to the open records requirement.
Okay. All right, well, I thank you for your time, and then also I just would like
Thank
to
you, Mr.
compliment...
Blanchard.
I'd like to
Your 5
compliment...
minutes are
I
expired,
appreciate
please,
that.
and I would appreciate
I'd
it
like
if
to
you would-
compliment Mr. Bates and the residents out at Sunset Park for really being proactive and really taking ownership of their park and their neighborhood. And I hope that you would take a look at the court out there, because I think it really could use some painting and some striping and just some general fix-up as well. So thank you very much.
Anyone else would like to ask anything under the Citizens Forum?
Hi, well, my name's Hernan Hernandez,
My name is Salvatierra.
and I mean, we're kind of here on the same page as Mr. Cotton and Mr. Bates about the soccer and basketball. I mean, obviously, we like the soccer side of it, and we always take turns there at Sunset Park. We grew up playing at Sunset Park, soccer. Basketball, pole, trash can on the side, that was our goal. It was a nice gesture of the city to put up the soccer goals, but obviously, we saw the wrong, what they're seeing too, the dangerous side of it and whatnot. We saw the hockey players, we see us, obviously, we see the basketball players, and we see the area that's there. I know when we used to go back when we were younger, there's a lot of horseshoe activity there. I'm not saying that there isn't now, because we're obviously there not 24/7, but it's a big area where that horseshoe's at. If you guys are considering reamping, making something new within the city to make it available, for futsal players, which is a different type of soccer. We do have soccer fields, that's correct, and we appreciate those fields, but futsal's a different type of soccer. And if we're there playing at that park that is, to my knowledge, the only park that has lights, it's hard to share that one court. So it'd be nice to have another futsal court or another court where we could play soccer and not be in their way, or vice versa. We take turns, but sometimes it's a little hard. The lights, they stay on for what?
Hour and a half. Almost
Hour and a half, which is generous, which is nice. But if that's the only park we can use, then that's pretty much the only park we'll go to, And if you guys take that in consideration, hopefully thinking of another park or, making it accessible to where maybe there's we can install lights somewhere else, then maybe, we can start playing, or they can start playing basketball somewhere else or soccer somewhere else, making it work. But, we can't do that unless, obviously, we have your guys' support as well. And this is all for the community. This is all, it's not like we're out wanting to get something big and dramatic done. It's just to help generations that are coming up that also want to play basketball, that also want to play soccer. They want to play hockey. They want to do something. It's accessible here at their town. I'm originally from Great Bend. In Great Bend, we didn't have much, but we played wherever we could, just like we did here at Sunset. But now that, there's hopefully some people who can back us up, some people who are making a voice, now hopefully it's available for us to have my children or whoever children growing up be like, let's go to this park. They offer it. We have it here in town. I think Salina's a big community, a big enough town to where it should have more than just one lighted court.
And adding to that, if you guys wonder why we use so much Sunset Park, it's because it's the center of Salina. Like, if you put it somewhere else, a lot of the kids from the different areas are like, oh, it's too far. So we just kind of gather right there. And like he said, we grew up there pretty much since we were freshmen. Now we're old men, we got married, we got family. And I've seen my little brothers growing up go and play there too, and see them too, and then we have to wait an hour or 2 hours for them to come off, and we have waited. But if you guys actually take into consideration to improvise in that park, it doesn't have to be professionally done. We improvise with trash cans. So just something small so we can use and have fun with it, We would really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for appearing. I think all recreational activities are important concerns, and I'm glad you all brought this here today. And Mr. Cotton's sitting right back there. We're going to redirect these conversations to the Parks and Rec Department, and So I feel confident that there are solutions to making it work for everybody. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Comment.
Sure.
Yeah. You know, I wouldn't downplay this. This is big and it is dramatic. But big and dramatic doesn't always have to be super expensive. You guys are getting exercise. Your kids are getting exercise. You look at our youth as a whole in this country. Our youth are not getting exercise. So, you know, I commend you on what is a very big and a very dramatic effort. And it's nice to have you come here and feel free to put input in on the planning side too. Because if we don't hear, we don't know. And as you can see by the different topics that were brought up for discussion today, it's a lot of stuff to know everything about. We rely on our staff, and staff relies on citizens to let them know what they need. So by all means, keep the efforts up. Thank you for coming.
And we'll keep the communication open. I know, again, we appreciate you bringing it in front of us because I think a lot of us didn't realize to the extent that the basketball courts were used there. You know, I think we talked the other day about, you know, there's certain courts in, you know, large cities that are known for this is where they're going to play round ball and stuff. And I think we're being brought up to speed as to some of the important things to the community, and I think you're right. I follow Dr. Davis. These aren't exuberant dollars, you know, hopefully they're being asked for, and it sounds like there's a need. So hopefully we can work with everyone. We do have a master park plan coming up, and hopefully we'll be able to make both soccer and basketball happy. Thank you, guys.
What would be the best way to ensure that we have the conversation going in terms of getting people's contact information, or would it be best if they emailed the city commission at our
Actually, I was
email?
going to provide them my business card, and I believe that the Parks Department's definitely had phone conversations with the basketball
Yeah, and that was
enthusiasts. I don't know about
that was another one
futsal
of our
so much,
concerns.
so.
Like, they come out there and they put these goals up without even coming out and asking the guys who are out there regularly playing basketball, would this be a good idea? They came out there and put the soccer goals up without asking the soccer guys who are out there regularly, would this be a good idea? We just came over there one day and it was there. We're like, what is this? What happened to our court? What happened to where we play at? So it was like stripped from us overnight, and we didn't know nothing about it. Nobody contacted anybody who goes out there to play, and we're out there regularly. So there's no excuse why somebody couldn't have took the time out of their day, like we're taking our time out to come here, to come out there and find out exactly what would be needed for where the community uses it, because you guys don't use it. I've never seen any of you guys out there, but I've seen them out there. I've seen them out there regularly, so I know if I wasn't out there, they would be able to tell you what we needed, as long as if I was out there, I could tell you what we needed as well. Opposed to if one of you guys were out there, you would just be like, oh yeah, we'll just throw this over here because I've seen them playing soccer before, I've seen them playing basketball before, so let's just make everybody happy and throw it in there without asking the people who are actually out there and actually using the equipment daily, regularly, what would be the best.
Yep, to come up.
Very much so appreciate the idea.
You're putting two sports together. We appreciate that. It's just like he says, maybe a little better planned out.
Communication between the people who use it. Yeah, that was our main concern.
But overall, I mean, thank you for the intent.
For recognizing that the attempt to upgrade it was there.
Yeah.
But now let's really focus on what needs to be upgraded.
And that was
there.
one of the reasons I reached out to you last night.
Yes,
As soon as I got
appreciate
back
it.
from, with Mr. Gage, and he sent out the email that he sent out, I wanted to make sure, and I asked him, can I share this? He told me yes. I wanted to make sure you guys knew that we were going to take care of what we need to take care of.
And I was out there when they took the goals down. I was smiling. It was a glorifying moment.
Now we need to get goals back up.
Yeah, goals back up. Another glorifying moment. I'll be out there with my camera rolling so I can catch that as well.
Totally valid point. I don't think any of us are arguing with you about the communication. I mean, best of intentions. We didn't anticipate the conflict that it was going to create, and so we thought we were doing a good thing. But there's certainly ways to communicate beyond expecting you to come to the city commission meeting or respond to our park master plan survey. So if I could, let me give each of you.
Thank all of you guys.
Thank you.
And thanks to staff for dealing with this so quickly.
Yeah,
I mean, it
absolutely.
kind of happened very fast, and I appreciate you guys recognizing the importance that court plays in a lot of people's lives and getting it straightened out. So thank you very much.
We are still in the Citizens Forum. Is there anybody else that'd like to comment? If there There are none. We'll move on to public hearings and items scheduled for a certain time. There are none. Could we have the consent agenda?
Item 6.1, approve the minutes of May 14th, 2018. Item 6.2, authorize the purchase and installation of an irrigation system at the U6 and U8 soccer fields at the Magnolia Soccer Complex from Fox Lawn and Landscape LLC in the amount of $39,450. And item 6.3, award bid for 50 mobile data terminal laptops to Dell EMC in the amount of $117,134.50.
Are there any items that any commissioner would like pulled from the consent agenda for further discussion? Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We approve 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3. Administration, resolution number 1875-56, 7.1.
Item 7.1, resolution number 18-7556, amending and restating the policy for the financing of public improvements as applied to the use of special assessment.
Mr. Tragg.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. As you well know, special assessment financing has been a topic of conversation for quite some time now. Fairly recently, in December of last year, the Commission at that time approved an updated policy for the financing of improvements through special assessments. And you, as sitting as the newly elected governing body, expressed interest in discussing the policy further and making amendments to the policy. So 2 study sessions were held recently, and from those, staff came away with direction regarding 2 topics, one of those being amending the financial guarantee portion of the policy, and the other being the petitioner's equity contribution. And I realize those sound almost synonymous or could be confusion. The financial guarantee portion of the special assessments is something that's been in place for quite a while, where an applicant for special assessment financing places on deposit a financial security that we hold, and we then can use if special assessments fall into default in that particular project. And so the policy that was adopted in the end of 2017 called for 35%. The direction that you provided out of the study sessions was to change that to 20%. And noting on the assumption that it's a 15-year general obligation bond issuance, which is pretty typical in Salina's approach, that guarantee of 20% is 1/5, or about 3 years, which corresponds with the amount of time it takes for delinquent taxes and assessments to go to sheriff's sale. So there seems to be some logical connection there that would keep us in a position where property wouldn't go into full default. The petitioner's equity contribution is distinguished from a financial guarantee in that the original policy incorporated the recommendations of the housing study and provided a table format of, depending on housing development type, density, and price point, different amounts of special assessments would be made available for the project, ranging from 100% for certain projects to shared contributions between special assessment and contribution by the developer. So in that policy, that developer's contribution towards the cost of the infrastructure was referred to as the petitioner's equity contribution. And so coming out of the study sessions, the consensus seemed to be to amend that such that there would be no equity contribution required by developers for new residential development, which would delete the current petitioner contribution requirement table. And you'll see that change was made in the policy as well. I would tell you that staff, Jason and I, discussed the review criteria that are in the policy, and they continue to speak to density and some of those housing study goals that were identified as review criteria. And our thinking was that this policy makes special assessment financing discretionary on the City Commission's part. You may recall that quite some time ago our policy was mandatory and said that we shall provide special assessment financing. You now, as a governing body, have the discretion on a case-by-case basis to approve or deny or modify. And so our thinking was that leaving that information in there is kind of a homework item for the developer and staff, and something that can be shared as part of the staff report for your information in comparison against kind of our performance historically. So as far as the fiscal note, this action has no immediate or direct fiscal impact. However, it will provide the possibility for larger special assessment financings going forward. With respect to conformance with the strategic plan, it's in conformance with goal number 5, which says the city will create a community of mixed-use quality development and redevelopment. Staff believes the policy as drafted will still provide a mixed-use residential development emphasis, or at least provide financing for that opportunity. And as far as alternatives, you could approve the resolution as proposed. You could provide direction regarding any policy amendments that you'd like made, or you could choose not to approve the resolution at this time, leaving the current policy in place. If you agree that the proposed policy is reflective of the direction that you provided, then staff recommends alternative number 1. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions for Mr. Schrag?
Yeah, one question, I'll make a comment later. Does this policy, the issue of payment for perimeter roads has not been established. And is there anything in changing this policy today that will unduly influence any decisions we could possibly make about perimeter roads in the future?
There are future decisions to be made on that topic, but I can't foresee that this policy would box you in.
This will not handcuff any
right.
decision-making ability in that regard. Okay.
I don't believe so, no.
I just had one quick question. What percentage do we charge for our administrative costs for administering the special assessments?
I should know that off the top of my head. 5%?
Is it 5?
5%.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Thanks. I thought that's what it was, but I didn't see it when I was flipping through here. Thanks.
Any other questions for staff?
Mike, I don't know if this is the time, you and I discussed today about the issues that we talked about with the density and price points. Maybe we open up the public and we can discuss that afterwards, but I think that's something I would like to discuss a little bit.
Okay. We'll accept public comment on this item. Is there anybody that would like to address the commission on this? I see a number of faces in the audience. I would just hope that we've studied this for 5 years or so, I'm hoping that we're not going to hear the same arguments over and over again, and then we can hold the conversations to 3 minutes apiece.
Hi, my name is Bob Hayworth. I live at 913 Twin Oaks Drive. I own Lee Hayworth Construction here in Salina, and I'm a developer in the community. And I just want to thank the commission for all the time and efforts that you've put into this, whatever how you feel, one way or the other. But I think this would be a great plus for the community, be a great plus for me and my company. And it'd be something to where I could come back to the commission before I put a lot more cost in my development that I haven't already through engineering, and know where you as a commission stand for me, so that I know where I sit on special assessments, whatever that may be, but I will know that before I spend another $50,000. So there's a lot of pluses with this in different percentages. It gives all of you respect for your decisions, what you want to make for the developer that comes to you. So I think it's a big plus for the city of Salina. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hayworth. Anyone else like to comment?
Tom Mertz, I live at 1936 Queens Road. I would urge you to vote against this resolution. I don't really have any problem with changing and adjusting public policy based on reliable data, but I don't see that being the case here. As you mentioned, Mr. Ryan, we've been talking about this for 5 years. You talked about this housing study, which recommended specifically the tiered price point setup. And it seems to me the arguments against it that have come up just in the past 6 months are pretty much emotional. The current policy didn't fall out of the sky. There was a lot of deliberation. There was study by city staff. It was passed by commissioners who had made clear the problems that they were trying to address, specifically that the infrastructure of Salina's streets and so forth approximates that of cities that are have much larger populations. This infrastructure costs a lot to maintain,
and it's just not wise to use public financing to encourage such unfettered development. The arguments I've heard for amending the policies, they're not new. They're the same ones that were presented last December. They don't address these concerns that the previous commissioners brought up, and I've not seen a lot of data supporting the argument. What I understand the current argument for this resolution to be is that developers need to build $300,000 homes and homes costing $300,000 and more because that's the only price range where they can make the money they want. And then the argument is that people will move up, and that will open up the lower cost homes and then provide the market for the lower cost homes. I don't understand that argument with a median household income of Salina being $45,000, so that means that half of the residents of Salina make that much and less, which means that they can really afford only a $175,000 home, even if they had $35,000 to put into it, which would be a 20% down, assuming they're moving up. I just don't see that people can afford those kinds of homes. So I would like to urge you to just keep the current policy, mainly because it's 6 months old. It's been the result of a lot of deliberation, and I think it should be held fast and enforced long enough so that we can determine by data whether it's effective or not.
Thank you, Mr. Mertz. Other comments?
Stan Byquist, 2601 South Ohio. I appreciate the commission spending all this time on this complicated subject, and I appreciate the city staff's time that's put in. And I would just hope that you would vote for this as stated. And if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Byquist? There being none. Anyone else? We'll bring it back up here for the commission and then further discussion, other action.
Just from a discussion perspective, I was led to believe that one of the reasons that the policy was changed in the first place was to stimulate more development in the central part of the city, and I don't think I've agreed with the idea that limiting greenfield development is going to necessarily stimulate growth downtown or rehabbing houses in town. But on the other hand, I've seen this be a little bit too arbitrary with the price points, the density. That little graph in the chart, it just never seemed to quite be easily applicable. But I think there is a newer demographic in our city which wants development other than in greenfield areas. And I've been told that there's no market for it, and my response is you can't find the market for it because no one's building it. It doesn't exist yet. And if it was built, the market would show up. And if you look at the loft housing downtown, you can see there are people who want something other than ranch houses out in the country. I think we're going to have to find the best way possible to stimulate rehab of houses, redevelopment of houses, infill, and I don't know what programs, grants, creative financing. I don't know everything that's out there, but that's going to be one of my missions for the rest of the year. I think we're going to have to grow that market. Now, once the demand has been identified, the onus will be on you guys sitting in the back 2 rows. I mean, if you can't build it, we need to find somebody who can. So it's we can't keep expanding the boundaries of the city and the population go down, because that is a prescription for a real tight budget. When all those public services have to be extended, the roads have to be repaired. Now, it's nice if we were building million-dollar homes and people were buying. That's great, because what does that mean? Somebody in town's making a lot of money. They're probably employing other people. So somewhere down the line, our economy should be benefiting from that. But we're not building that many in that short a period of time to where that's going to have a positive impact on our bottom line. I would rather have a development either qualifies for specials or it doesn't. It's much easier for me, all or none. But that means the control has to be on the front end. And we have review criteria, section 11, pages 10 through 12, and the white pages of our blue sheet. But we're going to have to look at those criteria very, very hard with every application. And that's where the may use special assessments, I think, is very important as opposed to shall use. Because our discretion is going to have to be way up front, particularly if it's an all or none phenomenon. I would rather see if a project satisfies the requirements, and then say, okay, let's do it and be done with it, rather than splitting the hairs on the different price points. But I think we're going to owe it to ourselves and to our citizens to find some way to fill up that dark hole that we're creating with empty housing, deserted blocks, blighted blocks that are being created as people do move out. And, as folks who build buildings for a living, we're going to need you to be part of the solution. However, whatever that solution, whatever form that solution takes. I don't build houses, but I know what type housing does work, for younger people, and if they don't have it here, that may be a factor in their deciding to stay here or not. So we got to come up with some solution. There are people who are going to want to move out to a big house in green areas, but I think we're missing the boat on the folks who don't want that. Thank you.
Other comments?
I have a few. Thank you, Mayor Ryan. First of all, I'd like to start by making a clarification and correction to remarks made by Mr. Welsh at the April 23rd study session, and I don't see him here, so hopefully this will reach him so that we can get this corrected. At the study session, Mr. Welsh indicated that a Salina regional administrator had told him that the luxury housing shortage was the biggest barrier to recruiting new physicians. The health of Salina Regional is obviously critical to our community, and successful physician recruitment is a big part of its ongoing well-being. However, it was important for me to confirm directly with Salina Regional that $400,000 homes represents the single largest barrier to physician recruitment. And the short answer is it doesn't. Rather, the Salina Regional Administration, like Schwann's Global and probably every other large employer here in our community, emphasizes that Salina's lack of quality housing in all price ranges represents an enormous challenge in being able to recruit and house its workers from every level, from hourly workers to management. And not just the housing sector that provides the biggest profit margin. I'd like to thank staff in particular for providing us with special assessment policies from Hayes and from Topeka. I also reached out to Manhattan and Lawrence as well. I think that our developers should be thanking us for this very generous policy that we passed back in December, because you wouldn't be afforded most of the same opportunities in these other communities. But the bottom line it comes down to is what's the best way to address our housing shortage, the shortage that was documented in our housing survey. And there's not a short answer to that question. It's a multifaceted problem, and a problem that's compounded by several elements. Staff and commissioners did labor for over 5 years to draft this policy. And I would like to thank staff again, and to thank staff in Manhattan and Lawrence for responding to my requests and my questions. My take on this, however, is I would love to, having had those policies in hand, I would love to reconsider this policy, but going back to what Mr. Mertz mentioned, we have no idea whether or not this policy is going to work and what kinds of effects that it has. Do I think it's perfect? No, I don't, especially after reviewing the other policies. But we've given it our best effort. I believe that we owe it to this policy to give it a chance to succeed. And I would just like to point out some of the key differences on some of the things that we are talking about changing today. Topeka, their developer financial guarantee is 20% cash or 30% other options like a letter of credit or a surety bond. Hayes requires 30% all in cash. The city of Topeka also has something that I really wish that we'd thought about creating a rubric for. They require a cost-benefit analysis, and that cost-benefit analysis needs to be able to demonstrate that any benefit district can pay for itself. And both policies, both from Hayes and Topeka, have pretty detailed mission statements and note that any special assessments are purely at the discretion. I would like to say that I agree with Commissioner Vice Mayor Davis in terms of I like to have things to follow so that we can make the most consistent decisions. I feel like when we're removing some of these items, please don't get upset with us because our decision-making process is going to change a lot from election to election. It's going to depend on how each one of us interprets these individual criterias. So just know that I acknowledge that we're going, with some of our decisions, if these changes pass, we are going to be inconsistent, and some of you may get your special assessments, some of you may not. So if we're going to own this policy, I think that we need to also own the fact that it's not setting us up to make consistent decisions on your and on the taxpayers' behalf. And I really, at that point, don't want to hear any complaints from the development community about who receives special assessments and who does not.
I think under the current policy, it's also the discretion of the commission. We just have tiers in there, and I think those tiers have set us up to fail. And to give an example, I believe one of our newer subdivisions, River Trail 2, we asked the developers to tell us, are you going to build below this benchmark or above that benchmark? And I believe there's like 3 homes out there now that are being built in there in that 210, 235, and one as much as 300. So what is that developer, was he to tell you when he came and asked for specials? You know, he would have obviously told you he was going to build below the 275, where in fact some of those homes may be above that 300,000 range. So, but I still believe that by changing the policy, and you're right, Commissioner Hodges, it is at the discretion of the commission and of city staff, and that's where we'll have to get the information from them as to, we would on any subdivision, how many homes are going to be built in that subdivision? Is there a demand for those? And I don't really care if that's at the higher or the lower end of new construction. Does the community need those properties? You know, I see Mitch sitting out here with the EDO, and if we're expecting to be successful in economic development, we're going to need housing to bring those individuals in. You know, we've answered all the questions that previous commissions had about sprawl and density and risk. I think one of the things individuals need to realize is this is not a tax on the taxpayer. This is a tax that the developer pays until he sells the lots, and then the individual that buys that home will be paying those taxes. We're going to be putting streets and infrastructure in no matter what, and the person buying that home's paying for it either way. I personally do not look at spatial assessments as an incentive. To me, it's a financial tool and a way for us to finance subdivisions that are advantageous to our community. I do agree with Commissioner Davis. At one point, prior commissioner said that I believe if we stop greenfield development, we'd see infill development. Well, that's kind of like asking Dr. Davis to deliver a baby. That's not exactly his expertise, and so we're asking new developers to do that. I do agree with you 100% in the fact that we need to look for grant money to do rehabilitation on current homes, and we need to sit down as a commission and look at whether we put out some RFPs and try to do some infill new construction. But you talk about incentives. I really believe that's where you get into how are we going to incentivize people to build in the core area. And it's not because they don't want to do it. It's because when you're building that price range of home, it's tough to make a profit. And believe it or not, most of us are in the business to make a profit at some point. So that's kind of my take on it. I think, we are a community that doesn't have large developers. We're already asking them to do contiguous growth, which means they're paying a premium for the ground because they're buying the ground that's next to that's already developed, and they also they will have 20% investment, and again, that stays on until 35% of their lots are sold. And a lot of them are builders, so they also have to finance the homes they're building. So it's not like they're doing this with no skin in the game, so my take is that as a city, we can help that happen and help our community to grow in a positive way.
Just one remind you that not all greenfield development has to be single-family houses. There's no reason why higher density housing can't be put on, I'll say, the edge of town if it's done right. And so we need to look at differences in types of housing put in these developments. This question for Commissioner Hodges and maybe sitting manager today. Would, in the section, I'm going to refer to section 11, it's page 10 on the white pages of this document. But would factors 1, 2, and 4 be a quasi cost-benefit analysis, or is what the Topeka did a lot more, I think it's a lot more, I'm sorry.
What page, I'm sorry, again?
10.
Starts on page 10.
Down at the bottom of page 10. They're the review factors that we're to consider with each application. I mean, it's not a form, it doesn't take the form of formal cost-benefit analysis, but I think probably there are some component parts of one in there, which we're really going to need to pay attention to. And I don't know if we would know how to recognize if the cost-benefit analysis was not favorable. And of course, it's nice to get an analysis, but only if you know how to use the results.
Right, and just to speak to that real quickly, I don't recall Topeka's being any particular rubric that's set down or anything like that, but when you just look at our number of road miles per citizen that we're responsible for versus our population growth, I mean, we're going in the wrong way. I'm not worried about default by the developers. They've shown that that they are that they have fulfilled their commitments in the past. That's not my issue. My issue is that once those streets go in, whether it takes 6 months, whether it takes 15 years, the clock starts ticking on all of those infrastructure improvements. And I think, from my point of view, the way it was worded in the Topeka policy somewhat, this is good. Topeka's sentences are a lot shorter, in terms of calculating out what that's going to be in terms of, like it says here, the life cycle of the street. What does that work out to in terms of the tax revenue that's going to be in to pay for the maintenance of that street? And I think it does go back a little bit in terms of, are those lots being valued at an ag valuation? Because, if they're bringing in a higher tax payment to help start taking care of that infrastructure, that's all very well and good. But if we're just putting more street miles on the backs of our citizens that are earning $45,000 a year that they're going to have to take care of, and we're just going to continue to keep falling further and further behind like we have with our parks, we're just going to have more deferred maintenance in terms of our roads. That's the part that gets me. It's the future responsibility of having the maintenance of those streets. I don't know if that answered your question. But yeah, I think that this does go through some of that. I don't think it states it quite as plainly,
Right.
but I think it's definitely an
Wouldn't
attempt
the
on
life
right.
expectancy of our streets be the same as Topeka's? I guess I'm confused.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think that it's not just the life expectancy, it's the number of miles that you have, and the acreage of the city that you have, and how that equates to a per capita taxpayer responsibility is where I'm going with that. Because if we just
From the studies I remember looking at, Salina's density is not out of line when you look at like communities, where you look at Hayes, Hutchinson, Emporia, Great Bend, Grand Island. I think we're not, I think we're right in the middle of that pack. I don't see, and again, I think City Manager Gage said it the other day, when you look at density, you've got to look at, park miles, and we got the Salina Airport Authority out there that takes up a fairly substantial amount of real estate that's not dealing with residential, so it's hard to compare apples to apples when you go to one community to the other to look at your density levels.
Oh, and I'm not meaning to compare, say, like Salina to McPherson or to Hayes or to any place else, but just in terms of comparing ourselves to ourselves. In the post-Schilling era, we've had about a 16% population increase, but our land mass has grown by 28%, and that's post-Schilling. So, I mean, somebody's got to pay for that extra, whatever, 12 or 13%, and that's my concern, is just the increasing burden that we are placing on a community that has whose median income is so significantly below the state and the national median incomes, and that's where my concern lies.
And I think, the cost-benefit analysis at some point has to include new schools, new fire station, new police, new civil defense warning systems. We're probably at that stage right now, but future cost-benefit analyses will at some point include those in as the real cost of further expansion.
Right. Well, in all honesty, when I most commonly hear the term cost-benefit analysis, it relates to economic development projects and business prospects, and so there is a rubric for that, but that's how many construction employees are going to be employed for how long and what are their wages. I think the intention of 1 and 2 are to get to the points that you're raising. One is the life cycle maintenance cost for the improvements and specifies the assumptions about the estimated life of streets and utility improvements. And the number 2 is the off-site additional public improvements. And the example that we use most frequently as we talk about that topic is, a satellite fire station. And as you said, that's not necessarily exact, but that and a recognition that those are things that need to be taken into account as well, and we can project forward in terms of population growth and make some assumptions about geographic location and response times, and then try to guesstimate when those type of improvements might be needed.
And it's always hard for me to just look at population growth, because I have to look at my community, and we look at the number of homes that are vacant right now, And it seems like we have a housing shortage right now anyway. It's a seller's market. And everyone, people will tell you, our population's not growing. And that could be true, but maybe our demographics have changed since this post-Schilling era. We maybe had 5.5 people per family. Now we're down to 4. I don't know what creates that, but we've created demand for more housing. I know we have the Lee building that's going to be going on here before long. I don't know if anybody's aware of it, but there's also a 55-unit senior living complex going on at the east end of Kerwin. So there is some infill like that going on. So there are some individuals that are trying to fill some of those. Again, I know we may have a conflict between the housing study and the Parks Master Plan when we look at Centennial Park, because I know the housing study stated that we ought to look at using part of that park that's not really a park, it's been a parking lot for how many years, doing something with that to try to generate some new housing there. So I think those are the type of things we have to look at, and I don't know what that looks like, but I think, again, Commissioner Davis, those are the type of things we're going to have to address. Going back to Section 11, Mr. Scragg, we look at, if you go to Section 1111, it talks about conformance with the goals and policies of the housing study, and I find some of that to be a little confusing and maybe contradictory to what we're doing. And I guess I'd ask for a definition of how that affects us when we look at 1111 paragraph C, where it deals with density, form, and innovation. Because right now we do about 3 homes on an acre, so I think we do, is the way I look at it. And if you look at this under number 1 there, I'm not sure exactly what that's trying to tell us when it says we'll have gross densities at or above 6 units per acre.
That comes directly out of the housing study, and I think it's just an intention to quantify a higher density product without specifying what that design might look like. So I don't know that it was intended to be a pass-fail or a requirement that had to be met to be eligible for special assessment.
I guess that's what I look at. If we look at a special assessments and we start, as Dr. Davis said, we start looking at that, how do we review, how do we interpret that? To me, that's almost a paragraph that needs to come out, because to me it's confusing if someone brings a plat to us and they're putting in 30 single-family homes, like River Trail 2 now. There are some multifamily in there, but are we requiring that? And I don't think that even meets the 6 units per acre.
Yeah, I would suggest that that's informational at best, that it's information to be provided for your edification as a commission, but it's not a pass-fail test. It's not a criteria that would have to be met to be eligible for special assessment financing. And
that's the way I was looking. But I think, if 5 years from now we need housing for people whose family income is only $35,000, and it's a critical problem keeping businesses from staying open, if we're going to spearhead housing development, we need to shift our policy at that point towards supplying that type of house. But I think it's one of 11 factors that we consider.
With respect to whether it should or shouldn't be in the policy, it is kind of going broader than maybe your stated intention of being open to 100% financing and tying back into that housing study for informational purposes only. So I would say that that's a policy decision about the policy that you are preparing to adopt.
I don't want to bring this policy back again, but that's what I'm afraid could happen. But I look at some of those.
I just think we're going to have to be a little more diligent than wondering if there's a curve in the road or art in the middle of the street. We're going to have to look at some hard issues with each application. And those issues will change every 5 years. But
or less.
It's a framework. Or two, right? That's the problem, trying to get a 10-year policy with a 4-year term. It just doesn't work well.
Is there other discussion? Is there a motion on this item?
Mayor Ryan, I move for approval of resolution number 18-7556, amending and restating the policy for financing of public improvements as applied to the use of spatial assessments.
Second. Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
The item passes 4-1. Thank you, Commissioners, for all the diligence on that and the development community for their persistence as well. 7.3, or am I right about that? 7.2. Thank you.
Item 7.2, resolution number 18-7557, establishing a date for a public hearing concerning the adoption of a plan pursuant to the Neighborhood Revitalization Act.
Mr. Schrag.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Despite the length of my background, the only action you're being asked to take today is to set a public hearing for June 4th to consider changes to the Neighborhood Revitalization Plan that we and our partner entities have adopted. But by way of background, state statute authorizes the communities to adopt a neighborhood revitalization plan, and that plan then can provide for tax rebates in targeted geographic areas in amounts to be set by that plan, subject to criteria that can also be set by the plan. So Salina entered into an interlocal agreement with Salina County, the school district, the airport authority, the Central Kansas University Extension District, this library line, and the library district to jointly form a plan, since it rebates the taxes of not only the city but all those other taxing entities. And so that interlocal agreement avoided the need to repeatedly take that back to the Attorney General for review and approval of that interlocal agreement, and made provision that amendments to the plan, whether that's renewal of the plan or changes to the plan, could be made with the joint consent of all the different taxing entities. And so nearly a year ago now, you had some conversation, or actually some requests for proposed changes to the plan. And there's more detail in the staff report, and I'd be happy to answer questions if you like, but I'll be brief. One of those was to remove from the geographic boundaries what is now being proposed as the downtown tax increment financing plan. The NRP rebates the tax increment that's generated. The TIF plan captures the tax increment and uses it for stated and eligible purposes. Well, we can't double spend that increment, so it's necessary to roll back the NRA out of the downtown TIF area. The second request it relates to the Lee buildings in particular, but was for a longer term of rebates and a higher percentage of rebates, and it's modeled off of the Lawrence approach that was used for the Polar Lofts, also developed by Tony Kersnick. And so staff drafted, and with your feedback, we finalized the wording for what we are calling projects of exceptional community significance, and tried to create a standard that others could be eligible for in the community, that it wasn't just specific to the Lee buildings, but created a criteria that would be a stretch goal for most projects. And so it's minimum of 50 housing units or 40,000 square feet of commercial space, demonstration of significant blighting influence on the neighborhood, a minimum of $10 million investment, preservation and redevelopment of a national, state, or locally designated historic landmark, and demonstrated vacancy for 5 years. So felt like that probably does rise to the level of an exceptional project that might merit additional rebates. The third request was adding a geographic area generally described as being the southwest corner of Ohio and I-70. It's floodplain in there. There's a lot of history in terms of KDOT condemnation of property to put in that interchange that challenged some of the property development there. So we were approached by Foley Tractor quite some time ago for that change, and the commission at the time indicated that they were supportive of that. And then the last one is also a geographic boundary change. We were approached by Brian Richardson and Brad Lancaster, who indicated interest in trying to acquire some vacant property in the area that's proposed to be added, bounded by iron on the north, Indiana, Gypsum, and Delaware Avenues. They approached the city commission at the time about their redevelopment plans there, the fact that property adjoins what's already in the neighborhood revitalization area, and their desire to possibly even purchase additional properties in the neighborhood. And then lastly, it wasn't something that was directed by a request or by the city commission, but each time we amended the plan, we ended up with Area 1 and 1A and 2 and 2A, and so as we tried to just streamline the plan, we boiled it down to Areas A and Area B as it relates to commercial and residential development. So You should have in your packet a red line copy of the revised plan. The only things left to finalize that red line document are, now that we know where all the other taxing entities stand, we can finalize the legal description and some of the other total assessed values of land and building in the area, the required elements from a statutory standpoint. So as I mentioned, the only action requested of you today is to pass the attached resolution, which would schedule a public hearing, and at that point then we can take up any one of the requests or the action in general. I would tell you as well that all the taxing entities, staff has attended their meetings, made one, if not more, presentations, and all of them have consented to the proposed changes. One of the questions that came up on occasion was, is this a la carte, or do we have to approve all of these? And the answer was, you can approve or disapprove any or all of them as you see fit. The rest of that story is, if any of them deviated, then we're headed back to all the other taxing entities to rerun the drill. But in the end, all the other taxing entities indicated their consent with all of the proposed amendments. So with respect to the strategic plan, it hits on a lot of things, having a city that's thriving economically and socially, being supportive of a community that's clean and attractive and inviting, providing quality of life, being well-maintained, balancing the expectations of a growing community with preservation of assets, providing high-quality services at the City Commission's direction, downtown being a thriving and vibrant place, respecting our heritage. With respect to the fiscal note, one of the things that quite a few of the entities were wanted to be reassured of is the existing tax payments that are made today are the base, and they would continue to be made. The rebate is only that added income that would otherwise go to those taxing entities, and that seemed to reassure quite a few of them. So on the one hand, there's no direct fiscal impact. Our revenue will not decrease, or nor will we have an expense. You can get into that economic development conversation about the chicken or the egg. Would the project have happened anyway? And if it would have, if you believe that it would have, then that's money you're giving away. But the intent of the plan is to identify targeted areas that need to be supported and have infill development encouraged. And so the presumption is that there's no direct fiscal impact. So lastly, options for your consideration. You could approve the resolution setting the date. You could amend it, presumably to set a different date. You could postpone consideration and ask for additional direction. Again, I guess that would be about the date, not necessarily the policy. Or you could decline to approve it, which kind of stalls out our process, and we don't go forward with the requested changes. So staff recommends option number 1, and it comes to you with the consent of all the other taxing entities that needed to provide that consent.
And you think the June 4th date's what we're...
Yes, there's a weekly publication requirement, so June 4th would be our earliest opportunity to get the publication requirement met and then take action. And I do know that we have some representatives of some of the projects that have been exceptionally patient as I've struggled to pull this project together, so they're here to show their support for their requests.
We appreciate yours and other staff's time that had to present this to all the taxing entities. I'm sure that was kind of a challenge and time-consuming, so thank you for doing that. Any questions about the report? Any public comment on this item? Bring it here for discussion. Is there a motion?
We got, he's just a little slow.
I don't want to lose my opportunity. Pat Beatty, 204 South Santa Fe, Overland Property Group. We are the development group along with Flint Hills that we just were awarded housing tax credits just a week ago, which was one of the pieces that needed to happen in order to put this thing together. But there's many. We need historic tax credits, which we're working on. We needed the city's support, which we got in funding, and now we need the taxing entity to structure to work for us, which is what's before you today. And it's kind of the final piece to put it together. I've gotten congratulated a lot from fellow citizens in Salina about this, because I think the building's near and dear to a lot of people, and they're excited to see something happen with it finally, as are we. But it's a massive project. I mean, we've done more units before, but this type of complexity is going to not only take us, but Flint Hills, which is Tony Krisnick's, all our attention. And again, we wouldn't be coming to you requesting this type of incentive if we didn't need it. So one thing that's come up, Mike, recently is, we have a plan for the first building. We have conceptual plans for the second two. Does the clock start on the rebate for the other two?
Fair question. We've had that come up in other instances, and so it's based on building permit. So you could do a building permit for phase one, that clock would start, and then as you approach phase two, it would get a new clock.
Great. That's excellent. So anyway, we would appreciate your support, and we appreciate all of your support in the past. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions for Mr. Beatty?
Pat, I might actually put you on the spot a little bit. We recently got Opportunity Zone designation. Does that help your project at all?
It does. So particularly for the other two buildings, that would allow, it kind of gets complex, but it's a tax issue. You could if you were a real estate developer and you had a capital gain, from a potential sale, you could use those proceeds, put it into, say, one of the two Lee buildings, and then if you hold that for 10 years, the tax is forgiven for the previous gain. So that's a pretty big deal, potentially, and it also could help on the first phase because I think you guys have had to go through Tax Credit 101, but there's investors in that, and they may be able to, because it's in an opportunity zone, they may be able to utilize that for their exit structure and even our exit structure, later on. So I think it's a really good thing, and I think it's something we'll utilize. But actually, one of my partners, Brett Johnson's, going to Washington, D.C. tomorrow to learn more about it. It's pretty complex, but on the surface, it's a good thing. So.
I feel like I've at least got an associate's degree in tax credits now.
Well, you already had to go through the new market tax credit master's degree. So
I was just trying to keep up.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion on this item?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion we approve resolution number 18-7557, establishing June 4th as a date for a public hearing concerning the adoption of a plan pursuant of the Neighborhood Revitalization Act.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item passes. 7.3.
Item 7.3, resolution number 18-7558, authorizing $60,000 in grant funds to the Salina Airport Authority for air service marketing funding for 2018-2019.
Mr. Trad.
Yes, as you may recall or be aware, in October of 2016, the City Commission approved a $50,000 grant to the Salina Airport Authority to partially offset local matching to a total amount of $125,000 for air carrier marketing incentives, of $200,000 in terms of a fly marketing initiative. The remaining local match was covered by Salina County and the Airport Authority. And the intent was to provide enhanced marketing for those in the catchment area of the people flying out of Salina. It was deemed a success, and we saw passenger enplanements increase significantly when compared to the prior 2 years. We find ourselves back with a little bit different circumstances, but a similar request. We now have commenced flights with United SkyWest to Denver and Chicago, which is a significant accomplishment and represents a significant enplanements in and of itself. And then additionally, it's time to consider a marketing request from the Airport Authority. From the city, they're requesting $60,000, and that would be for promotion and marketing over the next 12 months. The total marketing effort is a budget of $216,839, $60,000 from the city, $60,000 from the county, $60,000 from the Airport Authority, $20,000 from SkyWest, and the remainder, $16,838 from carryover marketing funds. Tim Rogers is here this evening, and he can certainly speak to it in greater detail than I can. But at the outset of the new commercial flight service, a strong media plan is critical to be successful, and I think we're hearing good reports here at the outset, and really encouraged and would like to keep that going. So, It's not complicated math. The fiscal note on this one is the $60,000 being requested in terms of funding. That would come from the economic development sales tax allocation, and we currently have an unencumbered balance in that account of approximately $1 million. It would be in keeping with the goal of providing the highest quality services consistent with your direction. And as far as alternatives, you could authorize the grant of those funds by approving the attached resolution, or you could choose not to by not approving the resolution, and obviously you could postpone or amend as you see fit. So once again, staff recommends option number 1, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Schrag?
I have no question about the amount that we're requesting. Is it, and this may be a question for Mr. Rogers, is it typical for the airline to put in this relatively small proportion of the, because I know we're marketing both the area and the airline, but
the contribution by SkyWest Airlines is the cash contribution. They are also providing for use in the marketing and promotion campaign over the next year 50 tickets on SkyWest, either from Denver and Salina or Salina to Chicago. Those 50 tickets are being leveraged, for example, to actually trade out additional radio promotion and radio airtime with the local radio stations and the regional radio stations. So there's a significant value to those 50 tickets that they are providing. That's an in-kind. We didn't list that as a cash number, but it is, on average, $100 one way to each location. That's round-trip travel. So it's a significant contribution in kind by SkyWest, and we're able to use a certain amount of those tickets also to benefit some local nonprofits for their fundraising. That's also where they want those promotional tickets to be used also.
I guess we're ineligible to win in one of those tickets. That was my only question. Thank you.
Maybe you could do
As
a
long as
radio
we can be
spot for him, right?
Transparent about our graft, I guess.
Tim, could you tell us what percentage, if you know, of our current outgoing or income are from out of Saline County?
We don't have the numbers yet, but anecdotally, it's consistent with the previous 2 years of the Denver flights to Denver with the previous carrier. And we are seeing the other, definitely the counties that we're marketing to, the 14 north central Kansas counties, Ottawa County, Cloud County, Ellsworth County, Dickinson County, McPherson County, just by doing the parking lot license plate kind of a walkthrough, seeing that still remains. Give us about another 6 months to a year. We'll do another a study that by zip code will be able to pull exactly the counties that are booking tickets out of the catchment area, and we'll have that a definite number after a bit.
And just anecdote, the time I took the flight a couple of weeks ago, young lady I sat next to was on a girlfriend's weekend in Chicago, and she found it was cheaper to fly from Salina than it was from Wichita. And we had free parking, and we were just an hour and 5 minutes from our home, so she said it was a no-brainer.
And she got to sit next to you.
And she got to sit next to me.
Well, the numbers are really pretty astounding. Just after 22 days, almost 30 days worth of flight information we do have, and it really represents and indicates the power of jet service and United Airlines, that partnership. In April, the full month of April of 2017, there were 1,324 total passengers. Just in 3 weeks of April of 2018, that was 1,604 total passengers, or a 21% increase. Already for the month of May, a full month, we're going to see some 2,700 total passengers that will enplane and deplane flights here at Salina Regional Airport. We've already had good news as far as the first major adjustment or change in the service pattern. Beginning on October 4th, the timing of the Chicago flight will, instead of departing at 6:30 p.m., that flight will depart at 4:30 p.m. for Chicago. that will give Salina travelers connections to 131 flights instead of the current 57, 130% increase in connectivity, and 108 destinations to connect to, up 96% when that change is made. We're seeing government and federal employee fares, military GSA fares in the market for the first time. United came to bat and did that at the last minute. The GSA was accepting bids, and that means that federal employees in the area and military personnel don't have to go to another airport. They can fly and use Salina as the airport convenience. We do have trained and experienced airline personnel that are out in the catchment area. We always talk about just not Salina, but the surrounding counties, talking to businesses and industry about how to best take advantage of that. The North Central Kansas Planning Commission has had a presentation up there during April, and again, a lot of good positive feedback from the North Central Kansas area for that. The campaign that we're starting off with is already just taken off in great shape. We've already registered and we've seen 5,100 new users to the Airport Authority Fly Salina website. We're using a lot of digital and Facebook social media activity. We've had on the digital side, just in the first 30 days, 315,000 impressions have been out there. Facebook, 66,300 impressions. To measure performance is click-through rate on those. The average digital and Facebook activity, the average click-through rate is 0.08%. We're seeing click-through rate of 0.98%. And the Facebook rate itself is 5.06%, or well above the industry average of 0.9. As we've been giving the presentations around and in other locations, and we're talking about how important this is to the community, and there's a statement, a quote, that I'd like to attribute to Gary Foss, the managing partner of the ArcStar Group, who's really led this effort to put this together. And the quote goes this way: "There are few greater contributors to economic development than quality air service. United Jet service operated by SkyWest to both Chicago and Denver will increase trade activity to and from Salina and north central Kansas by enabling faster and easier movement of passengers to more locations. Quality air service helps with business recruitment, business retention, and quality of life." Very much appreciate the partnership with the City of Salina. It is a true partnership with the city, the county, Airport Authority, the Salina Economic Development Organization, the Salina Area Chamber of Commerce. And I think we're off to a very good start, and we'll see results that will continue to be impressive as we move ahead through this year and into next year.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Oh, I just have one quick question for you, Mr. Rogers. Sorry, before you leave. Didn't mean to interrupt. The sales calls and events that's listed under use of funds, I just wasn't quite sure what that meant, so I was just, for my own edification.
For example, today, Diana Kotecki, who is an associate of ArcStar Group, she is in town today and tomorrow. So she has tomorrow a call with the president of and the executive staff at Bethany College to let them know about the benefits of United Service, the ability to sign up for Perks Plus for the corporate accounts, the organizational accounts, booking groups, items like that. She has this afternoon local area major visitor attraction. She's been out there, and we're working with them on. We'd like for that location to have United be the official air carrier of that facility. We met with the Tony's Pizza Event Center today, talked about the sponsorship and promoting there. So those are the types of events that Diane is doing to outreach and out into the area too, with in McPherson with the Chamber of Commerce down there, up north into Beloit, Concordia, Cloud County, and the local colleges and organizations to sit down and she's a 30-year veteran of the airline industry. She knows how to help local business industry, local organizations take full advantage of United Airlines programs.
So, okay, so those aren't, they're not discounts or comp tickets or anything to those. it's having her on the ground making those sales calls?
That's
Okay,
correct.
all right. I just was trying to figure out
It's really her-
where the ArcStar fees and then the breakdown for that as well. Okay.
The ArcStar fees, the airport authority, the monthly fee for the ArcStar consultancy is $5,000 per month. And so that equates to one of the $60,000. And that's the work that Gary Foss does on the reporting, the advocating, working on schedule changes during the course of a month.
Gotcha, but not the sales calls. Okay, cool.
Right.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any public comment on this item? Back here for discussion. Is there further discussion or a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of resolution number 18-7558, authorizing $60,000 in grant funds to the Salina Airport Authority for air service marketing funding for 2018 to 19.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 7.3 passes 5-0. 7.4.
Item 7.4, first reading ordinance number 18-10937, amending Chapter 5, Article 4, Section 5-123, and repealing Chapter 5, Article 4, Section 5-26, pertaining to permissible activities and hours of operation of clubs and drinking establishments.
Mr. Schrag.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. You may have noticed on the news recently that a week ago today, Governor Collier signed into law House Bill 2470 related to this topic, and we were able to find out that its effective date is once it's published in the Kansas Register, which could be as early as Thursday of this week. So the two provisions of that law were, one, to change the hours of operation when it's permissible to be open from 9 a.m. to 6 a.m. in the morning. The second change was to allow local establishments, well, I should back up. So immediately following that news, the city clerk's office was contacted by one or more establishments interested in how soon they could open at 6 a.m. So that kind of prompted expediting this item. The other statutory change was being able to provide for self-service of beer and wine. And suffice it to say that that's pretty complicated. The statute does give the Secretary of Revenue till the first of next year to promulgate those rules. So we've got a little bit of time to respond to that and prepare for that. And then lastly, I didn't report it in my staff report, but Jake Peterson with the City Attorney's Office in the process of preparing this amendment also noted that we probably need to change some of our ordinance language about the operation of open saloons. So it was a little outdated. He has accommodated those revisions as well. And if you have specific questions, I'll have to defer to Jake on the operation of a saloon. But with respect to this ordinance, it's in conformance with our strategic plan in terms of providing highest quality services at your direction. No anticipated fiscal impact. I guess there might be a marginal increase in alcohol taxes for that additional 3 hours of sales. And your options for your consideration would be approving the ordinance as presented, postponing consideration to a specific date and time, and providing direction with regard to any information you'd like to request, amending the ordinance as you see fit, and the one question that may apply to is whether we have to abide by the state's 6 a.m. or whether we could pick an alternate time. And that was identified in the blue sheet as something that needed further research. Clark Mize and Linville's looked at that and concluded that we do have discretion to be more restrictive but not more lenient. And then lastly, you could decline it. Again, that's a question of whether we're obligated to comply with the state statute as it's been amended. So staff recommends option number 1. I would also note that we're trying to expedite this and for the benefit of our local operators. So if you wish to deem it as there being a compelling public interest, you could make that motion. If that motion's approved, you could consider it on second reading. So I think Jake may have some additional details he'd like to share with you.
Thank you, Commissioners. Mr. Mayor. In relation to the open saloon amendment, there's a There's a small clerical error, I think, with referring to the article within the code. I don't believe that Section 526 is actually in Article 4. I believe it's in Article 2, if memory serves. So to the extent that the commission would like to approve the ordinance, we'd suggest that amendment be made to the ordinance, both in the title and in the published notice. And to provide a little bit more background on the open saloons question, as I was reviewing the code, I noticed that there was a provision in the code in Article 2 that seemed to prohibit drinking establishments from serving any alcoholic liquor, i.e. Beer or liquor above 3.6% alcohol, in quantities less than 6.8 fluid ounces, which seems to happen on a fairly regular basis here in town. And that section was enacted in 1966 and only exempted private clubs from that prohibition. So as we were developing this ordinance, I spoke with Mr. Scragg, and we thought it would be prudent to just clean up the code a little bit and take that prohibition out of the code. So unless the commission has any further questions about that.
And that is in this writing of it. We don't need to amend for that.
No, that's correct. Yeah, the only clerical error just relates to the article designation for Section 526.
Questions?
Well, one, I hope I don't sound ignorant asking it. What would be the rationale for doing or considering a compelling public interest to open up our drinking 3 hours earlier?
Well,
and it's not that I'm just...
Right.
I mean,
you're
is
not
there-
the first person to question the reasoning of opening at 6 a.m. rather than 9 a.m. The compelling interest is we do have local operators that are currently licensed who've already inquired and are anxious to begin opening their operations at 6 a.m. just as soon as it's lawful by the state of Kansas. So our compelling interest would be to synchronize our code with the state statute, which potentially is going to go into effect Thursday of this week.
And the reason not to do that is for public comment between now and then. Is that correct?
Yeah, Dave,
I mean,
why you do a
between
second
first and
reading
second
at a
reading is
separate
to
date.
allow
Yeah,
for public
typically,
comment.
And that was going to be my issue. There may be some temperance unions or other organizations who would like to give their opinion next week. But that's just me personally. I just...
That's, I want to say that's within your discretion, but I really need to turn to Jake to find out how much discretion we have to deviate from the state statute.
Yeah, and like Mr. Scragg said, we've done some research into how much discretion the commission has in deviating from those state statutory hour requirements, and there have been a few Kansas Supreme Court cases addressing that issue in the past, and we believe that those are still applicable in good law. So as long as Mr. Scragg said, as long as we stay within the boundaries delineated by state statute, which are, as of this new legislation, from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m., essentially, as long as we stay within those time boundaries, you have discretion to set when drinking establishments can serve alcohol.
So that discretion could either be to set an alternate time or not to do it on second reading and be a week or, well, actually a couple weeks behind.
So if it's the state law, a local jurisdiction could not approve this, then, could it?
No, we could, if you wanted to stay at 9 a.m., since that's between the window of 6 a.m. and 2 a.m. that the state provides, you could.
Okay, I just had a little brain glitch, but you cleared it up. Okay.
So we can be more restrictive.
Correct.
Right. If we
You couldn't let them open, you couldn't let them close at 3 a.m. and
Yeah.
open at 5 a.m., but as long as you stay in that window.
Yeah, the more restrictive, more lenient question is a function of what does the statute do, and it's more of a consistency point, so as not to be in conflict with the statute. Is that fair to say? Or am I overstating the distinction?
No, I think that's fairly accurate, yeah.
I mean, there are people who need a little drink to get on an airplane at 6:30 in the morning. I don't want to deprive them of their opportunity. It was just the second reading. It's the only thing I had a question about.
To the extent it might be of interest, as you probably know, the ordinance would not be effective until published, and that does, the Thursday, Ms. Wicks can speak to this better than I can, but we could probably anticipate publication on Thursday or Friday. Is that fair to say? If it were to be approved on first and second reading.
Without looking at the schedule for the newspaper, I would say probably Friday. If I got it to him tomorrow morning, like pronto in the morning.
Then once it's published, it's effective.
Effective for Salina.
Yes.
Well, maybe we could muster up a motion to approve it, and then we'll consider the question.
I will at least get you that far down the road. Mr. Mayor, I move approval on first reading ordinance number 18-10937, amending Chapter 5, Article 4, Section 523, and repealing Chapter 5, Article 2, if I have it correctly? Section 526?
Correct.
Okay. Pertaining to permissible activities and hours of operation of clubs and drinking establishments.
Second. Been moved and seconded. Is there further discussion?
We didn't need to change that to Article 2 or anything like that?
Oh,
You did? Okay, good, I didn't hear that. Awesome.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Is there a motion for a compelling reason?
I have to go to church Sunday when you guys do.
Well, okay, all right. Can we please define what compelling is? I mean, our lives at stake? Is Jake going to go to Leavenworth for steering us down the wrong path and not getting this passed until June 4th, if that's the way we choose to go?
Or I would ask the police chief if he has enough, can he sign enough officers on short notice to cover 3 extra hours of drinking on a holiday weekend?
I certainly appreciate how this has shifted to be Jake's responsibility.
The person behind the microphone.
Sounds like a policy question to me.
You're probably right. You have wide latitude in terms of what you determine to be a compelling public interest. Staff, just given the urgency in which we were contacted and trying to expedite it, thought we would at least offer that up to you.
Well, obviously, it wasn't too big of urgency, or that business owner would be here to declare his or her need for us to declare a compelling public interest in doing this today.
Well, if it helps at all, with no meeting next Monday, then you would take it up June 4th, and it would probably become effective June 8th compared to May 24th.
I think with all the advertisement on TV promoting alcohol consumption as what you have to do to be cool, I think it just sends the wrong message if we rush this through. That's just my personal moral look at it, but obviously just takes 3 to push it through, and I won't kick, cry, or scream if it goes through, but that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, I think we should be careful when we declare a compelling public interest exists, and I believe that we'd be okay waiting. And again, it gives somebody a week or 2 to show up if there's a group that does want to air their feelings, so I'm okay on waiting. They haven't been able to sell at 6 a.m. for years. I don't think another 2 weeks is probably going to hurt anyone, so that's my feeling.
Well, then we'll end the discussion there. Everybody is in agreement with that. We'll move on to the next item.
Oh, all this, okay.
Development business?
Item 8.1, resolution number 18-7551, authorizing the mayor to execute a sidewalk cafe license agreement with Blue Sky Brewery and Eats LLC, authorizing placement and construction of an outdoor sidewalk dining area in the Santa Fe Avenue right-of-way abutting Blue Sky Brewery at 116 North Santa Fe Avenue.
You may not be able to see me, but you can hear me. I'm going to present the report from here because we don't have enough people to do 2 things at once. But this is an application for approval of a sidewalk cafe license agreement. The applicant is Blue Sky Brewery and Eats LLC, and the location is 116 North Santa Fe Avenue. That's depicted on the map there. This particular property is leased by Monty Shadwick from Property Partners LLC, who is Brian Richardson is the owner of the building, and Mr. Richardson is an applicant on the application that was submitted, but the agreement will be between the City of Salina and Blue Sky Brewery and Eats LLC. We've provided for you the background that we basically had this ordinance in place for nearly 4 years, but we are now just receiving actual formal applications, and this particular applicant has been in business for a number of years and has provided all the necessary documentation. So they do have a current food establishment license, and they have provided copies of their food sales and liquor tax reports. This particular group met with the city's development review team on February 21st to go over their plans, and this is what the current front of their building looks like. And their plan is to develop an area in front that would be 8 feet in depth and 20 feet in width, so the total coverage area would be 166 square feet, and they're looking for an area that would have 2 tables with seating for 2 persons each, and then they would have 8 bar stools for a total seating capacity of 16 persons, except for standing patrons. So the area in question is on the left-hand upper part of the screen there, so it would come out from the northern portion of that building. I'm going to see if I can grow the size of that a little bit. And so the area in question would come out in the sidewalk in this location. The barrier fence that they're proposing would be 9 feet from the Santa Fe curb line following the streetscape project completion. There are 2 planters out in that area now, but those are being relocated as part of the streetscape project, and staff has determined that the minimum path of travel that's needed will be provided. The applicant has provided plans that indicate that they would have a barrier fence that would be 36 inches in height. It would be comprised of tube steel rail system on 1.5-inch diameter posts. The posts and rails would be painted. The height and design of the fence conforms with the ordinance that has been adopted. One thing we wanted to note, and will still require some follow-up, is that a portion of the fence facing Santa Fe will have a standing height bar top that is 3 feet 6 inches in height, 18 inches in width, and 14 feet in length. So there's a proposal to have essentially a standing bar on top of the barrier fence. And I pointed out to Mr. Shadwick, and he's going to follow up on that we will want to get feedback from the Division of Alcohol and Beverage Control, whether that will conform with their guidelines that require the barrier fence between the sidewalk and the alcohol serving area, because it would allow for alcoholic beverages to actually be placed on that bar above the height of the barrier. So that's a homework item for Mr. Shadwick to confirm that. The outdoor furniture proposed will all be professional grade, specifically designed for long-term outdoor use, and have a multi-year commercial warranty. We don't have cut sheets for those at this time. There are some cosmetic changes they're making to the front of the building and the canopy area, but this is a blow-up of the area of what it would look like. As far as lighting, the applicant will be permanently removing the blue gooseneck lights that are presently there and incorporating new LED lights into the underside of the canopy to better illuminate the sidewalk and create some interest. And I think I have an image for that. There is no plan for any additional signage, and the barrier as it's proposed, will be using a semi-permanent system. There'll be 1.5-inch posts. They'll either be surface mounted using anchor bolts, or they'll be recessed with a reusable sleeve so they can be removed without causing damage to the new sidewalk and streetscape. The bottom of the canopy that you see in this picture will be 8 feet 8 inches above the sidewalk level. The canopy will be extruded steel and have tie-back rods. The purpose of it is to block afternoon and evening sun, and it will be similar to what's across the street at the town site building. We've outlined for you the review process that was established, which starts with a public hearing before the Design Review Board, and then making a recommendation to you, reviewed by the City Commission. The review criteria is spelled out there in the report. The Design Review Board reviewed this at their March 22nd, 2018 meeting. Mr. Shadwick appeared and spoke and also answered questions. At the conclusion of the hearing, the Design Review Board voted 5-0 to recommend to you that Blue Sky Brewery's application for a 166 square foot sidewalk dining area be approved, subject to a number of conditions. And basically those conditions are just a recitation of the sidewalk dining guidelines that are in place, and so they're simply reinforced by the Design Review Board. The Design Review Board's findings are on page 7 and 8 of your report, but they did find that the sidewalk dining area will conform with the sidewalk dining guidelines pertaining to size and will not impede pedestrian travel in this location, and will not obstruct the walkway in the immediate vicinity. So your options today would be to approve the attached resolution, which would authorize the mayor to execute a sidewalk cafe license agreement with Blue Sky Brewery and Eats to allow the placement of a sidewalk dining area on the Santa Fe sidewalk in front of the Blue Sky Brewery restaurant. You could return this application to the Design Review Board for further consideration, or you could decline to approve the proposed license agreement and provide further direction to the applicant and staff. I would note that prior to the Design Review Board meeting, there was some thought in the applicant's mind about trying to do something prior to the streetscape work being completed, but it's my understanding that this applicant will wait until the streetscape work is completed in front of the restaurant storefront before moving in that direction. Some of the facade changes that you see highlighted here will be implemented without the need for moving out into the sidewalk. So they're doing some changes with overhead doors and some of the front facade work, but that work can proceed. And then what you see in the lower left corner there is a fairly small, in relation to their total frontage, dining area that will be confined at the north end of their building. So this is the very first application that has come forward for your review, so I'd be open to any questions that you have.
I have one quick question. I don't know, we're approving the square footage, but if you look at the actual table layout, it's a minor deal. I just want to make sure. It looks like on the one table they have 3 seats instead of 2. I'm not an architect, but it looks like 3 little circles on that north table. I don't know if that, because on the blue sheet it said 2 tables of 2. I just don't want to short them a seat if that's what they're looking for.
Well, it's another, related to that, there are 8 seats at the bar, 2 tables of 2. That's only 12, but the application says seating for 16. Unless I'm doing the math wrong.
Yeah, it does.
Well, you're not, there will be an exhibit attached, and if we have misinterpreted that, then we will clarify, but you are not, you're essentially approving an 8 by 20 foot area to be set aside as an outdoor cafe, and so you're not setting limits on seating or any of those things. You're setting aside an area that's 8 foot by 20 foot in that location, and there may be some variation within that on the seating. And as I mentioned, I'm not positive that the state will allow this bar on top of the fence, but if that turns out that is permissible, then that will be located above the height of the fence. Okay. So the real operative note here is not the seating, it is the square footage, the dimensions of the licensed area.
Other questions for staff?
I have a couple. First, on page 7, where it lists the conditions, I had a question regarding item number 4, the wastewater from the cleaning of pavement, buildings, furniture, or other outdoor surfaces must be collected and discharged to the sanitary sewer system or other approved wastewater treatment process. Am I understanding that the sidewalks can be hosed off and then sprayed into the gutter, or do they have to collect that? I just wanted to make sure I was understanding that correctly.
Well, the idea is that it is not to be discharged directly to the storm sewer system, so it's possible that there could be a floor drain, or we'd be looking at a floor drain. I see Ms. Tasker is still here, so she may want to weigh in on that, but the idea behind that was that it not be sent directly to the storm sewer system. We realize that people are going to hose off sidewalks and do today, and it goes into the storm sewer system, but the idea would be that there would be floor drains or some other means to get it to a treatment area and not just surface drain into a storm sewer.
And I don't know, gosh, we may just really be putting Ms. Tasker on the spot. Are there drains? This is just a follow-up to that. Are there drains then contemplated, like periodically in the sidewalks, so that, or would if a new restaurant wants to put in a new sidewalk area, then they would be constructing a drain, putting in a drain at that point, if they wanted to choose to clean their area, like by hosing it down?
Well, I'm trying to go directly. These conditions are directly from the guidelines that were adopted by the City Commission in 2014. So I will have to go back to those to speak. But we do have ordinances that don't allow things like that to be washed directly into a storm sewer. So it's my understanding that it is floor drains that would be used to get those things so that it goes into the treatment process and not directly into the storm drain.
Okay. The last question was, there was some discussion with the Planning Commission. I don't know if it's on this one or the next one, but this question does apply to both. Have we considered doing some sort of linkage in terms of amount of square footage allowed, linking that to, say, like the width of the property, as opposed to just setting a maximum square footage? Is that something that we could be taking a look at in the future?
Yeah, we recently just did a set of cleanup amendments to the Sidewalk Cafe ordinance, but one of the things that the Design Review Board indicated at their meeting was that there was the ability to recommend a larger than 200 square foot dining area, but there wasn't much guidance on when that was appropriate or when it was not appropriate. And it's actually in the next item, the old Chicago case, where their dining area is larger than 200 square foot. And so one of the things that they discussed was either raising the 200 square foot amount or setting up something that there was a sliding scale based on your frontage on the street. So that could be a homework item for follow-up, but the ordinance is somewhat lacking in terms of providing guidance for when it's okay to be over 200 square feet and when it's not.
Thanks. I think that would be, obviously, it's not critical, but I think that would be something that would be nice to see in the future, because if you've got a storefront that's 2 or 3 bays wide, obviously their square footage needs for sidewalk dining might be completely different from one that's just a 25-foot front.
Commissioner, I think you have identified a practical difficulty with that wastewater collection that it surprises me it hasn't come up before now, in all honesty, in terms of the applicants and having been before the design review board, but that one may create some difficulties, both in terms of plumbing a drain as well as just practical difficulties for the businesses.
You know, all the other in other communities where you go there, I'm not sure I remember seeing storm drains. I think you probably sweep it and mop it if you need it. I mean, I don't know what.
Bricktown in Oklahoma City, I've never seen anything there.
I think it's.
I don't know if this is a question for Greg or Dean, but I presume the city commission has, these were recommended by the DRB, but it's still up to the city commission ultimately to ratify them.
Yes, that is certainly the case, and you might recall that the ordinance change did allow for promulgation of the applicable regulations via the city manager's office. So I would think long-term it could be addressed there, but for this case, I looked to Mr. Andrew, but I believe the intent was of the nature of the Design Review Board's recommendation, but certainly the ultimate conditions under which the license agreement may or may not be issued is a matter for commission determination.
The conditions that the DRB recommended were based on recommendations of staff, but those were based on the guidelines that we have in place. And so I'm continuing to search through to see whether the wastewater requirement is a guideline or whether it's in the ordinance itself. In any event, any condition or requirement that is not workable or enforceable is certainly within the discretion of the governing body to change.
Well, I just wouldn't want to do anything that was going to adversely affect our water supply, especially since we just had a study session on it. So
Well, I think the other question you asked, is our pretty new sidewalk going to get torn up every time someone wants to put in a sidewalk restaurant just to install the storm drain? That's Ms. Tasker's concern as well.
I'm sure what they're trying to get at or concerned about is using some type of a chemical or something that might be harmful to the aquatic life, that they're trying to prevent that from getting into the storm drain systems. And, if you had blocks and blocks of sidewalk and cleaning it with, I'm not off the top of my head, do I think of an aggressive chemical? In our case, they're fairly random, but long-term, that might be what they're trying to get at, is something that would be harmful to aquatic life in the storm drain. Trying to collect these after the streetscape project is done and install storm drains or floor drains to tie into the sanitary sewer system that's typically inside the building would require some thinking and effort. So I think that needs a little bit of review as how we go forward, if Dean agrees.
I agree it needs to be reviewed, but the number one question is whether it's in the guidelines that are going to be promulgated by the city manager, or whether that requirement was included in the ordinance, and that's what I'm searching to try to find.
I just made a quick review, and I don't see it.
I mean, is this something that can be tabled? Because obviously, Blue Sky will not be doing theirs for quite a while, and Old Chicago is probably a ways off from that. Is that something we need to research before we move on? How would we handle that?
It certainly could be postponed. I think the question is the applicant's expectations and timing. Dean, do you know of any urgency on either one of their parts?
Well, there has been some urgency since these went before the Design Review Board in March, but it's more important to get it right. And so the idea was that the license agreements as executed would have attached to them the exhibits of the ordinance, the sidewalk cafe ordinance, as well as the regulations, the administrative regulations that govern sidewalk dining. And so
Mr. Mayor, would it be possible to maybe take a 5-minute break to let staff clarify what's in the ordinance and what's just in policy? I think it'd probably be easiest for everybody.
It's a very good recommendation. We'll take a 5-minute break until 6:30.
Thank you.
6-minute break. discussing our problem?
So what,
Have we come to a decision about whether it was guideline or in the ordinance? And
the license agreement that's before you indicates that we will have a license agreement. Attached to that license agreement will be the approved site plan for the sidewalk dining area, the application, a copy of the ordinance, Chapter 35, Article 7, that deals with sidewalk cafes, and then also attached to that will be the regulations adopted pursuant to the ordinance. In your action where you modified the ordinance recently, you delegated authority to the city manager to promulgate those administrative regulations, and the item that deals with wastewater from the area going to the sanitary sewer system is in those administrative regulations, so those could be modified by the city manager. The conditions of approval from the Design Review Board were based on the ordinance and the guidelines that had been adopted in 2014, and so they are just that. They are a recommendation, and it is within your authority to act on this without taking those into account, and just recognize that the city manager has the authority to modify that to allow it to go into the storm sewer system instead of requiring that it go into the sanitary sewer system. That would be an administrative item.
Additional detail, the wording of the resolution itself is the provisions of Chapter 35, Article 12, attached as Exhibit C, and the regulations adopted pursuant thereto, including any future amendments to the article and regulations adopted pursuant thereto, are incorporated as if set forth herein. So it contemplates attachment, promulgation, the regulations which are promulgated by the city manager, and it contemplates future amendments. So I think by adopting the resolution, adopting the sidewalk cafe license agreement, you're not imposing those requirements. You're authorizing the city manager to promulgate those regulations. So we'll
And then
take that into account.
administratively, you can get at the point of the impracticality of the, or policy
Yeah.
question of whether you want the drains or not.
Yes, in fact, if you're looking at the illicit discharge ordinance, there is similar language, but it does speak to the use of soaps and detergents and solvents and is a little bit more specific in that regard. So that might be the starting point to clear up that question.
Good point, Commissioner. Is there further discussion? Any other questions? Any public comment on this item? We'd be ready for a motion up here, I believe.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve Resolution Number 18-7551, authorizing the mayor to execute a sidewalk cafe license agreement with Blue Sky Brewery and Eats LLC, authorizing the placement and construction of an outdoor sidewalk dining area in the Santa Fe Avenue right-of-way abutting the Blue Sky Brewery at 116 North Santa Fe Avenue, recognizing the specific condition number 4 will be dealt with in the future by the city manager.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item passes 5-0. 8.2.
Item 8.2, resolution number 18-7552, authorizing the mayor to execute a sidewalk cafe license agreement with Sammy's OC LLC, authorizing placement and construction of an outdoor sidewalk dining area in the Santa Fe Avenue right-of-way, abutting the old Chicago restaurant at 214 South Santa Fe Avenue.
Mr. Andrews?
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. This is an identical application for a different location. This is for a sidewalk license agreement in front of the proposed Old Chicago restaurant. at 214 South Santa Fe, which is on the west side of Santa Fe Avenue as depicted on the map there. The owner in this case is Sammy's OC LLC, which is Amro Sammy is the principal for that. Since this is an application for a restaurant that does not yet exist, we don't have a copy of their food service or food establishment license and no sales and liquor tax reports. But based on their business model, we are confident that Old Chicago meets the definition of a restaurant under the ordinance. They submitted an application after meeting with the city's development review team in February, and the primary matter of concern was that it appeared on their initial plans that they were proposing to have some fire pit fixtures that would be located out adjacent to the public sidewalk. And after some discussions and some revisions, they modified that so that their proposal consists of that having some custom tabletops that would be have the recessed fire pit features on the actual tabletops, and those would be protected by tempered glass flame guards. And the proposal to install those was reviewed by the building official and the fire marshal, and was found that those were code compliant if located on the table. And so the dining area in this case would cover 413 square feet, and the proposed site plan shows 6 tables seating 4 persons each for a total seating capacity of 24 persons. As we noted, the proposed area exceeds the 200 square foot limitation. In this case, the barrier fence again would be set back 9 feet from the Santa Fe curb line after the streetscape work is complete. There is one lamp pole in the vicinity, but there are no other physical obstructions within 15 feet of the dining area. So as proposed, the minimum travel path on the sidewalk would be maintained. The applicant has provided plans indicating the barrier fence would consist of tubular galvanized steel with a top railing. The fence posts and gate would be painted a cocoa powder coat. The proposed barrier fence would be 36 inches in height, which conforms. They've also provided specifications for their chairs and tables. The tables would be mesh topped with E-coated steel and tubular steel legs, but they would have 2 custom stone top tables, which would have the fire pit feature centered on the tabletop with 6-inch tall tempered glass wind guard. And the information that they have provided has indicated that they have used the type of furniture they're proposing at 3 other Old Chicago locations. They are proposing 4 decorative wall-mounted lanterns would be used to illuminate the sidewalk dining area. They are proposing signage on their front facade and their rear facade. The posts and railings would be surface mounted with heavy-duty masonry anchors. And I just want to reemphasize in this case and also the previous case, city staff would not approve any type of anchoring system that would do damage or permanent damage to the newly placed sidewalk. And so they're using a surface mounted system with anchors, but it won't cause any permanent damage or anchoring to the sidewalk if it has to be removed at a future date. They are proposing a 3-foot wide metal awning that would extend over a portion of the sidewalk dining area on the front facade. Again, this was referred to the Design Review Board for a recommendation. They applied the review criteria. There is a provision that states the sidewalk dining area shall not exceed 200 square feet in area unless the City Commission otherwise approves the application and executes the sidewalk cafe license agreement. We have reviewed this, and except for the size of the sidewalk dining area, staff has determined that the proposed sidewalk dining area complies with all applicable provisions of the sidewalk dining ordinance and administrative regulations. The Design Review Board did concur that the increase in size to 413 square feet was justified in this case, partially as a result of the fact that the Old Chicago has 75 feet of frontage on Santa Fe, and that additional area was needed to provide for optimal operation of this area and provide for adequate circulation. So the board, Design Review Board, did recommend that their application for a 413 square foot dining area in front of the restaurant be approved. And the only condition that they had, which is not directly related to an existing ordinance or guideline, was based on building and fire code, and so the tabletop fire pits may not exceed 200,000 BTUs, and they must maintain a vertical separation of at least 84 inches from any overhanging object or feature. So this does come to you with a recommendation for approval from the Design Review Board, and they are recommending approval of the increase in size to 400 square feet, which they believe is justified, and even with the increased size, will not impede pedestrian travel along Santa Fe. So your options this afternoon would be to approve the resolution authorizing the mayor to execute the agreement. You could return this application to the Design Review Board for further consideration, or you could decline to approve the proposed license agreement. With that, staff would be open to any questions you might have.
Questions for staff?
I think we did our best to put graphics in your packet so you could get an idea or sense for what that area would look like.
I just had one question with regard to the fire pit and the exhibit that was provided. This one here, I don't know that it's marked, so I can't identify it by its name, but it looked to me like there were fire pits that were incorporated into the fencing around the edge, and I am just assuming that this is like a generic. I just wanted to confirm that it's a generic rendering, or maybe I've misunderstood what these.
That rendering the staff has confirmed is a photograph taken from the Old Chicago in Manhattan,
okay,
where they do have fire pits around the perimeter of the dining area, but
Okay.
there's no public sidewalk in that location, and so the primary purpose of that photograph was to illustrate what the seating area type of furniture would be, but the fire pits would be tabletop units,
Okay.
and they would not be like those depicted in the photograph, which is taken from Manhattan's Old Chicago.
Thank you, because I just had a question about that, and then, of course, the dedicated to-go parking, which if this would have been a rendering, would be on Santa Fe, so I just wanted to clarify that.
So they thought it would be helpful if they had a photograph of what it actually, their furnishings and their patio area installed, and so the one in Manhattan is not in a downtown location, and so it's not an apples-to-apples comparison.
Other questions? Public comment? Back here for action.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve resolution number 18-7552, authorizing the mayor to execute a sidewalk cafe license agreement with Sammy's OC LLC, authorizing placement and construction of an outdoor sidewalk dining area in the Santa Fe Avenue right-of-way, abutting the Old Chicago restaurant at 214 South Santa Fe Avenue, with the same clarification in regard to wastewater disposal as in the previous motion.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item passes 5-0. We'll move down to other business. Commissioners have any comments for Mr. Schrag or questions? We'll move to 9.1, the request for executive sessions.
Do we need to do these one at a time?
Yes, please.
And how long will the first one take?
I may be overly optimistic, but let's say 20 minutes.
20 minutes, okay.
Overly.
Mayor Ryan, I move the City Commission recess into executive session for 20 minutes to discuss the potential acquisition of specific real estate, the identification of which would be contrary to the public interest based upon the need for the preliminary discussion of the acquisition of real property pursuant to KSA 75-4319B6. The open meeting will resume in this room at 7:05, or 7:07, actually.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And we will be back.
We are not expecting action on this item or the next item.
Okay.
So.
What? This is 6:46.